Hello, I'm John Moore. I'm the Managing Director of the IoT Security Foundation, and I'm joined here today with Richard Marshall.
Hi John, good to see you.
And you, Richard, we've been working together for many years now, but Richard, what I want to talk to you about today is the work that you've been involved in the working group that we have on the IoT Security Compliance Framework. So before we get into the meat of this, can you tell me what is the IoT Security Compliance Framework?
So the framework, John, is very much intended to provide a really clear set of direction as to what's required for delivering a secure Internet of Things product. So rather than that there's lots of descriptive material out there, but what that actually means for an organisation, what it means for the products, what it means for the supply chain. So all of the pieces, what are required to deliver that secure product.
So that's interesting. In order to deliver an IoT security product or service, there are many things that have to come together. So can you tell me a bit more about some of the things that are inside the compliance framework?
So that's what actually makes IoT very interesting, is because of its breadth. So as part of the framework, there's the various components to do with not just the obvious product piece, which is fairly self-evident, but it's the fact that there's a business aspect, there is a supply chain aspect. So there are a number of facets, if you will, to the framework. So the goal here is very much to provide that very much in the round view of what it takes to deliver a secure product, and obviously its related service to the market. So that's really where we start from.
So that's the starting point for the framework. So who is it for? Can you tell me about the people that should really be interested in looking at it?
So given that, if you will, that 360 view that we've tried to deliver on, then obviously there are the fairly obvious aspects of the development folks, be that engineering, but also there are the other parts of the business. So there's the operational aspect. So for those who are involved with the supply chain, modern products now aren't just about a bunch of components. There are often intellectual property that's been brought in, so that in effect forms part of your supply chain. There's obviously then the other parts of the business, the communication part of the business. So a key part of it is the business processes, but also making sure that senior management are also included in the framework, because as we've seen with some of the recent headlines, it's really important to make sure that your senior executive team are fully briefed and there are the process and mechanisms in place to support them in the event that the company or organisation is then approached over an issue or a potential issue to do with the product.
Understanding that the world has changed, supply chains, and putting products together is really quite a complex business now. How would somebody who downloads the framework, how would they use it? What can they expect?
So obviously with that breadth of scope, we've tried to very deliberately, as it were, break it down into smaller chunks. Because of that, the number of different audiences who are going to use the framework, the framework is very deliberately split into relevant sections. So there is a piece for business process. There is a piece particularly for the engineering side of the business, both in terms of hardware and software. But there are the other aspects, so the cloud services side, the web application side, and as we've just been talking about, that whole supply chain piece. How does that all fit together? So it's very deliberately structured so that rather than somebody being faced with some very large document for which they may not feel either suitably qualified or outside of their experience, it's very much intended to be delivered in such a way that it can be parcelled out to the various subject matter experts inside the organisation, and then particularly for larger organisations who will probably have quality processes, the goal there is very much intended that it will fit into the kind of quality processes one might expect in a larger organisation.
Okay, so we have a number of groups that should be interested in this document, and we've talked about how it can be broken down. At what point, when should organisations look to be adopting a very comprehensive framework which you and the team have put together? When should they be looking to adopt it?
So the short answer is now. And the reason for that is a variety of reasons. The first one is because IoT products that are being considered today typically have long life cycle. So the sooner one starts in terms of embedding and enshrining the security framework into that whole new product introduction process, the better. Particularly because one of the things about security is only as strong as the weakest link. So it is that importance of getting all the building blocks together in place up front makes the whole introduction of a secure product that much easier. It's particularly with hardware for anybody who's delivered any kind of hardware product. It's an awful lot more difficult to change it once it's in production. So it's an awful lot easier to get the requirements in upfront early, and that just makes the process and the flow work that much easier. And is obviously considerably less costly. Having to make significant changes to a product to accommodate security environment in the same way as would apply, for example, to a safety requirement in a product, you obviously want to have those up front.
One of the goals that we set ourselves out at the beginning was to make sure that anything that we produce is easy to use and will be consumable. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we close up this short session today?
Quite so. One of the goals here was obviously when you're trying to write a set of requirements, we've deliberately tried to keep them fairly tight and concise. But obviously what that doesn't do is it doesn't give you some of the background to where some of the requirements come from. So what we've deliberately done is there is then a set of additional documents that sit alongside the framework that then help adopters in terms of understanding what's behind each of the sections. So there's the general set of best practice guides, which are very much deliberately designed to pick up particular aspects, particular security aspects in the framework, and provide some of the background, not just in terms of in simple terms what they are, but also to give reference material, because we don't profess to be the sole source of information on security, but to give, as it were, the reference links as to where people can go and find out more information or other industry best practice that already exists. And then what we've also done is particularly in the vulnerability area, we have a further set of, again, guidelines which provide a lot more practical information rather than just saying, have you got a vulnerability disclosure policy? We've deliberately gone some way to provide a practical set of guidelines that companies can actually use as a starting point. We will have there are further documents in preparation at the moment, and our expectation is that they will come out probably in Q1 2017.
Well, let me just pick you up on that point, because clearly IoT is huge. We know there are a lot of application areas, and we can't cover everything certainly in the time span that we've been focused on connected consumers. So could you tell us a bit more about what we can expect to come hereafter, and what is the scope of what we've done today?
So that's a really good point, and our initial focus, as you say, was the consumer market, partly because that's where a lot of the headlines were coming from. But obviously now the goal of the framework was not just to write it purely from a consumer perspective, but to actually consider how we can scale the framework out to other markets. So whether that's industry, enterprise, ultimately some of the environments where obviously you mentioned critical national infrastructure. Now they're a little way off because they obviously require quite a considerably greater level of security awareness. But very much the goal in 2017 is that we transition from the current consumer focus, where obviously there's a lot of publicity and focus right now, but then moving into those industrial spaces, enterprise spaces, medical, for example. So that's just really, albeit a very quick snapshot of where we look to really evolve the framework and support not just the consumer space. Sure. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of the activities that we've been working on in the last year.
And thank you, Richard. Hopefully that's given our audience a much better feel for what the compliance framework is about and how it works with our best practice guidelines, not only that exist today, but will be coming along further. We would encourage further all organisations that are producing products and services into IoT to adopt the framework and our best practice guidelines. And of course, you can download those from our website. Thank you for watching.